The Mazda 3 has been going toe-to-toe with the big boys like the Toyota Corolla and the Honda Civic for decades. But this new generation has something the others don't. Thank you for watching Downshift, where we do car reviews, comparisons, lists, and a whole bunch of nonsense. Make sure you watch the videos all the way through and subscribe, because every year 10% of YouTube revenue goes to the Ocean Conservancy. Let's save those turtles. And that's all-wheel drive. And it's a good thing too, because it has snowed like every day that I've had this car this week. And it has been perfect. I've had no problems in the snow. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now that we're behind the wheel, let's talk about dynamics. Because after all, this is a Mazda and this is Zoom Zoom. So as you would have come to expect, you can find a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder under the hood of this Mazda 3, pumping out 186 horsepower. That is some of the most in this segment. All that power goes from the engine through a 6-speed automatic gearbox, through the Skyactiv all-wheel drive differential, putting power to whatever wheel needs it most. And that has been the thing that's kept my wheels on the ground all week. Now, this 2.5 liter naturally aspirated engine is one of the bigger displacements in the segment, and it makes some of the most power. And it really kind of makes this car feel entirely more substantial. I just got out of the Honda Civic. There's going to be a head-to-head between this and the Honda Civic next week, so make sure you subscribe for that. But stepping in between these two, you really kind of can tell a bit of a difference between the two cars in terms of substance and just build materials and quality. Some of the Mazda build materials are some of the best in the game. The leathers, the metal switches, the aluminums, even the plastics are high-end. But we'll get to that in a little bit. What we do need to talk about is dynamics and handling, and that is someplace that I think this Mazda really shines. The suspension and differential work so well together to keep the body balanced and the chassis composed, especially in the bends here. The steering has a great feel. It's got more weight and substance than something like the Corolla or like the Civic, but you still have a nice ease and, you know, kind of light, and it's still an economy car. It's still an electronic steering rack, but you get a little bit more heft. You have to be paying a little bit more attention behind the wheel of this thing. But yeah, the way that this car puts power down and it grips, I've had no problems all week in snow, rain, dry, pushing it. You know, it's been great. Ultimately, the feeling behind the wheel of this Mazda 3, in a word, is just rewarding. It's much better than you would expect it to be, and you know, it's much more engaging than something in this segment. But let's stop talking about driving for a minute and talk about the general feel in the cabin, something you're not going to find on a spec sheet. The best thing about these Mazda cabins is simply the design and the build materials. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but the build materials on this thing are just top notch. The leathers and the stitching and just the quality of the craftsmanship, even the plastics, they just feel a little bit more substantial. You get in the Civic and you have some of those kind of tacky, cheap plasticky buttons on the steering wheel. Everything has a nice haptic feedback, or nice feel and weight to it in the cabin. It really does feel much more premium and elevated than something else in the segment. And with that, we'll talk about design, but I want to start on the outside first, because this is a brand new for 2019 model. This is the 2020 Mazda 3. It is the premium, it is the all-wheel drive, but it's got an entirely new look to it. And I have to say, some of the Mazda designs are top notch. I just love the kind of minimal, elegant, swooping Kodo design language. The grille in the front is suffering from a little bit of Audi elephantitis, but I think it works with some of the darker and kind of, almost star effect grille pattern. Of course, you have your safety suite up there, your radar cruise and your brake assist and things like that. But the front bumper and fascia are very minimal. It's very cool looking. It just works. There's a long hood, and then of course you get to the side and you have these nice gunmetal wheels that fill out the arches really, really well. Mazda always provides really cool wheels. The Civic does really good wheels too, and the new Corolla as well. So everything is kind of coming up in the segment here. But in tandem with that, as we get around to the profile, you do see that this is a Mazda 3 sedan. And there was some dude in the comments that asked for the sedan. I'd already done the hatchback, so this one's for you, dude. But basically, the sedan is good. If I were to put my money forth into something like a Mazda 3, it would absolutely be the hatch. I think it just looks a little bit better. You have those rear 3/4 blind spots that are horrific, but that's what you kind of trade off for in the hatch. You get a little bit more headroom, a little bit more trunk space. This is still a handsome car, but I think it looks a little bit better in the hatch. And then around back we have some really cool kind of modern, contemporary darkened taillights. It's very dramatic. It's kind of a smoked effect. And the LEDs back there look really, really crisp. And then of course the center logo on the trunk is how you actually open the trunk. There's a button on the bottom, and moving down all the way to the bumper is the dual exhaust. And that's something that's kind of a Mazda signature. They've always given you that in the last few years. And personally, that's something that I really like to see. It's real, and it's dual, and it's symmetrical. And that's what I like to see. Now with that, let's move into the car, because that's where you're gonna really spend your time. Let's start with the trunk though. Now, like I said, I would go with the hatch. That's a bit more space, but you still get a good amount of room back there. You get split folding seats, and it can accommodate quite a bit. So there's definitely still some value back there. Now, when you get into the second row, or the back seat, I should say, this is where the value proposition falters a little bit. And it's really tight in the hatchback. It's tight back here too. I'm 6'1". I cannot really sit behind myself, at least comfortably. I could sit back there, and then this person would have to maneuver their seat, and then I would be pinned. My knees would be trapped. I'd be on the outside. It's just not the best. You do get a sunroof, and I do like the white leather a lot. That's probably one of my favorite things. It helps bring in a little bit more light and air into the cabin, so you feel a little bit more open, but still, it could use a little bit more space. And then moving up to the cockpit. This is obviously where you're gonna spend all of your time, and that's a good thing, because this is the best part of the car. We've got the two-tone interior here with the white leather and the black accents. We have a new steering wheel for this generation. One of the things that I actually really like is the integration of it's kind of the tablet style screen into the dash, but it's not. So a lot of manufacturers, Toyota especially, is guilty of this, just tacking something on. It looks really cheap and kind of chintzy. This screen, the way that it's integrated into the dash, reminds me so much of Lexus, and it gives the cabin such a more elevated feel. And I know I keep saying that, but it really comes through. That, with the build materials and the stitching and just the softness of the leather on the dash, it really, really just kind of differentiates itself from something like a Civic or like a Corolla or anything else. And with that, of course, the cabin is a little bit more pinched. It's a little bit more cozy, but that's kind of the Mazda thing. This is the Zoom Zoom brand. This is the sexy, the sporty. This is the poor man's BMW. Or it's built for that purpose, and that's really what comes across. It's a little bit tighter cabin. My knees rest up against the center console a little bit, but it's padded, it's leather. It's really, really comfortable. The seats bolster me well. It's got lumbar support and everything like that. It's a good package. And then, of course, in terms of technology, you have a Mazda safety system with lane keep assist, with active steer assist. You get, front collision mitigation, radar cruise. You get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in here. And this is one of the new things that was a huge improvement from the previous generation to this generation. This is the first time in this car, this was the first time we've seen the new Mazda infotainment system. This was the first car to get it in their lineup, and it is so much better. The camera on the old system was awful. It was grainy. It was just terrible. It was like an old Sony CyberShot from like 2004, and now it's so much better. The images are crisper, the resolution is higher, it's brighter, you can actually see what's happening behind you, which is fantastic. But yeah, ultimately navigating the system, it just feels more expensive. I'm so glad that they redid that. That was a huge problem with some of the other ones. It felt so dated, and they've fixed that. So ultimately, final thoughts on the Mazda 3. It's a good car. I really, really like what they've done as far as the direction of this new generation. I love the fact that they have all-wheel drive. Now, you can't get that in the Honda or the Toyota. That really sets it apart, along with the interior design and the exterior design. And granted, some of those things are subjective, but one thing you can't argue with is the quality of the interior build materials. The way that this cabin comes together, it is more elevated, and that's why I think Mazda could charge a little bit more, and they do at times, and it's totally worth it in my opinion. The driving is rewarding, the interior is comfortable, and the exterior is good to look at, and it's pretty efficient. It's got a bigger engine than something like the Honda or Toyota, but you still will average about 30 mpg combined. So over that, it's a good car. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, go ahead and hit that thumbs up and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future content. But if you're